Okay, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to be getting started very shortly. People are joining us, finishing off those Thursday afternoon snacks. While we're waiting, could you give us a shout out in the question and answer box? Tell us who you are and where you are from. Hello, Zena. Hello, dear. When will the webinar start? Very good question. In a few minutes. Just waiting for people to join. If you've already joined and you can hear me, then if you could give us a shout out in the question and answer box. Who are you and where are you from? It's our dear friend Shahir from Yemen. Hello, Shahir. Good to have you with us. Oh, the early birds from the Yemen. Hello, Saddam in Iraq. If you're just joining us, we'll be starting very shortly. People just putting cartoons on for children, husband, getting ready, last slurp of coffee. While we're waiting, if you could give us a shout out in the question and answer box. Who are you and where are you from? Hello, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Miriam, hello, Lebanon. Mystery person from Iraq, Kurdistan. Personal greeting from Shahir. Thank you very much, Shahir. Karim, hello, from Egypt. All colleagues from Kurdistan, hello. We'll be starting very shortly. While we're waiting, if you can give us a shout out in the question and answer box. Who are you and where are you from? All colleagues from the Lebanon. And Anonymous, hello. Hello, Anonymous. Hello, Dilda. Lots of colleagues from Iraq. Okay, just another minute or so. Waiting for colleagues to join. Tell us in the question and answer box who you are and where you're from. Many colleagues from Iraq joining us. Okay, I think we're ready to start. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. A very warm welcome from the British Council. My name is John Shackleton. I look after our teacher development work for the Middle East and North Africa region. I'm based in Cairo. I'm joined by my very dear colleague, Nora Saba, who's based in Bahrain. We have also a colleague from outside the region, but is bringing some of that Parisian flair to this afternoon's proceedings. Laura McWilliams, senior teacher, British Council in Paris, and of course, our very own Hala Ahmed, who is the face of the Ask Hala webinar series. Before we talk a little bit about the topic, just want to say a few things. Don't forget, we've got the question and answer box, and we'll be pausing periodically to look at some of your questions, some of your comments. So please keep those coming in throughout the webinar. If you haven't joined one of our webinars before, if you don't know much about the Teacher Networking Initiative, of which the Ask Hala webinar series is an important part, then you can find out more. You can look at some of the previous webinar recordings and lots of other things that we have on our microsite and our website, and I've just put the link there into the chat box, into the question and answer box. So please do take time to have a look at our website and see what's going on. Details of, for example, the next webinar and how to register for that if you haven't already registered. Okay then, so today, teaching young learners remotely. By popular request, we asked you a few months ago what topics you thought were particularly important, particularly relevant now to our particular stage in terms of how we are working effectively in the remote teaching environment, and teaching young learners was very high up on everybody's agenda. So that's why we've chosen this topic today. And Hala and Laura and also Asil, she manages to get beyond the technical barriers, will also be joining us to give a regional perspective, a perspective from Oman in particular, about some of the challenges of teaching young learners. And I think in a way that's what the topic is about. It's about the challenges, but it's also about the rewards of teaching young learners as well, of course. And Hala and Laura will be looking at this topic essentially, I think, with a couple of different lenses. The first, I think, is to do with how young learners, or how teaching young learners differs from teaching adults, or how it's similar in some way. So that's the first lens. And the second lens, clearly, as this is the theme that runs through all of our Ask Hala webinars, we'll be looking at the differences between teaching young learners remotely, digitally, virtual environment, compared to teaching them in the face-to-face environment. There'll be lots of practical advice, practical guidance, of course, as always, but also, as always, all of that good practice underpinned, of course, by the evidence base, by our experience, about our understanding of what works best in the teaching and learning and assessment of English. Okay, thank you so much indeed. I'm now going to hand over to Hala, who's going to begin the webinar today. Thanks, Hala. Hala, can you hear us? Okay, if you just bear with us for a second, perhaps take the opportunity to have a look at our website. Slight technical issue, we've lost Hala. but I'm sure we will get it back very shortly, so just bear with us.
John, maybe while we're waiting for Hala to come back, our participants could tell us how much experience they've got teaching young learners online. Maybe if they could tell us in the question and answer box if they're teaching young learners online at the minute, or if they anticipate doing so in the future. That would be really interesting to see what kind of experience is out there.
Excellent suggestion. So please, in the question and answer box, while we're waiting for Hala to join us, could you do that? Could you do what Laura suggested and tell us if currently you're teaching young learners online, and a little bit about the length of time that you've been doing it? That would be great. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, maybe also what kind of technology you're using. Are you using Teams or Zoom or Google Classroom or some other kind of online service, just so that we can see what we're dealing with? Be good to find out.
I'm back. Sorry,
Hey,
I was
hello.
sorry. I was disconnected. So I'll share my slides again if this is okay. And thank you very much, John, for the introduction. Today, as John mentioned, we'll be tackling the issue of teaching young learners remotely. We'll be providing practical advice as well as some key theoretical background and some key consideration. Just a reminder for everybody who's joining us today to visit our website so that you can have access to all of the Ask Hala webinars, in the first phase and in this phase, and the many other resources for your use. So my colleague Noura will be posting the link for the website in the Q&A box. And in today's webinar, we're going to look at 4 things, really. We're going to discuss and identify the differences between how young learners and adults learn, and if they obviously learn differently. So what are the key differences? And what are the implications of this on the class, on the teaching methods? Also, my colleague Laura today will be giving you a bunch of interesting practical teaching techniques you can use in your classes as well as remotely, and we'll finish with some key considerations while teaching children remotely. So let's start with these 2 pictures. I want you to look at the pictures and to tell us about the situation you're having. How does teaching kids online look like to you? Do you think kids are happy with learning online and learning remotely, or do you think kids are struggling with it? Can you submit your responses in the Q&A box? Think about your own young learners, the children you teach remotely or online. You think they're happy with this new experience, or are they struggling with it? Are we receiving any responses, John?
Well, I was just going to say, while we're waiting for those responses to come in, quite a few people have responded to Laura's question about platforms, and Zoom, Google Drive, MS Teams. Just having a look now. Yeah, struggling is an answer that's coming in. Challenging.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to share a quote with you now, and I want you to guess who said that quote. The parent in the picture on the left, or the parent of the kid on the picture on the right? Left picture or right picture? Whose parent said that quote, you think?
Can you tell us what the quote is, Hala? Did you
Yeah,
speak
education is essential for these children, and it's more than 1 + 1 = 2. Socialization and hands-on experience is how elementary kids learn best. So who do you think said that quote? The parent on the left or the parent of the kid on the right?
Quite a few answers coming in now. I think the consensus is on the left.
Right, because the picture has got a parent, right? Well, actually, this quote, this quote was said by the parent of the kid on the right. The parent spoke to the CNN about how her kid is struggling learning remotely online when the schools were closed during the pandemic. So I want to give the quote back to you guys, and I want you to tell me what the quote, what this parent's opinion means to you. Education is essential for these children, and it's more than 1 + 1 = 2. Socialization and hands-on experience is how elementary kids learn best. So do you support the parents' point of view? Do you have a different opinion? Can you relate from your teaching experience? Tell us through the Q&A box.
Quite a few answers coming in about the question we had, what's the general sense of the experience that young learners are having? Yeah, and I think, again, the consensus is around words like struggling, challenging. The word boring was also used as well.
Yeah, in my experience, actually, some children thrived with online and remote learning. Not everybody struggled, but some children, did very well for some reasons. Perhaps the official exams pressure was taken off. They took control of their own learning. They were in charge of pacing their learning time. They made choices with their parents about when to learn and when to do other activities. So for some various reasons, some children, supported by some factors, handled or managed the online and remote learning quite well, but some couldn't, of course, as you can see. So do we have any responses around the code, John? Do they agree with the code?
Yes, I would say so. I would say so.
Right. Okay. So let's move.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well.
Let's move on and listen to Asil, one of our community of practice leader. She's based in Oman at the moment, and she actually surveyed some of our teachers in MENA, and she got their voices and their opinion around today's topic, teaching young learners remotely. So in the Have Your Say section, we got some points that Asil collected from a very interesting discussion with her fellow teachers that we'd like you to listen to, and also we'd like to get your opinion and your comments on those points. The points obviously are around the challenges involved in teaching young learners remotely. Here we go. Let's listen to Asil.
Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. In Have Your Say, I will present to you the challenges the teacher have faced while teaching young learners remotely and if adults face the same problems. So the first challenge is concentration span. As we know, to ask a child to focus or to attend the lesson online while they're looking at their screen for 30 minutes or for 45 minutes on something that is not cartoon or something that is not part of their interest is very challenging. Children often struggle to pay attention, especially there are no physical activities in their online classes, and sometimes the platforms or the websites that are being using can be very distracting to them. The period of time for which a child differs from one age to another. So for example, 6 years old, they can fully concentrate with their teachers for around 12 to 18 minutes. However, with adults, like for example, 16 years old, 32 to 48 minutes is the period of time. And they can also multitask. So I'm sure that we have a lot of adult learners where they are attending their online classes and they are watching something else on their phones or on other devices. Another thing is that for young learners, they might feel tired or hungry, and they can also start feeling sleepy, which makes them lose their concentration. A second challenge, which is a very common problem to both young learners and adults, is motivation. Young learners are not self-motivated. Unlike adults, they motivate themselves to attend their online classes because they have certain goals or aims that they want to pursue. So for example, getting high marks, passing a test or something like that. But with young learners, it can be very challenging because they need their teachers and their parents to motivate them to attend their online classes. Another thing is that each child might have a different learning style, and with online classes sometimes it's very challenging or difficult to address all these learning styles. Another point that for example, not being able to go to school, playing with other kids, this can be very demotivating, and staying at home, whether there's a lockdown or a curfew, that can be very demotivating for them even to attend their online classes, facing some technical issues or sharing devices with their siblings. A third challenge is insufficient time. We know that with young learners, the pace of their study can be very slow. They are slow learners. They need all the time and attention from their teachers to learn a specific lesson or to complete a specific activity. As students can only focus, young learners in particular, can only focus on one activity at a time. They also need instant feedback or a lot of feedback and comments from their teachers. So the time cannot be enough for them to receive all of that. While with adults, if the time is not enough, they can still carry on doing their work and be given extra activities also to do. But with young learners, giving homework and these things can pile up to them, and then they will start feel that's too much workload and they might feel lost. Finally, lack of interactivity and social presence. Not having enough interaction with their teachers, young learners lose that interaction. So it might be very challenging for them because they are not able to communicate with their teachers. If they're facing any problems, the teachers is not there to observe what they're facing or giving even feedback. And as well as with their peers, having any activities where it involves group work or pair work, and this can also be affecting their social presence and their social skills. However, with adults, it's very easy that they can create their own groups or communicate with their peers in using social media. And with adults as well, we encourage the learner autonomy, but with young learners, they need all the attention from their teachers and their parents. And the interaction that is limited can really affect them and make it very challenging for young learners. So basically, these are the 4 most common challenges that young learners are facing while teachers teaching them remotely. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Asil. So Asil identified with her fellow teachers 4 key challenges. 1, the concentration span. 2, motivation. 3, insufficient time, and lack of interactivity and social presence. So do you agree with Asil and the teachers? And what is number 1 challenge for you from those 4 challenges? What's number 1 challenge for you? Again, please type in your responses through the Q&A box. Any responses, John?
We're still waiting for comments to come in, but earlier comments that I think relate to both the quote and also this lack of interactivity and social presence. One comment coming in saying, yeah, it's the socialization that's lacking, despite the use of breakout rooms. Very interesting comment as well about essentially about the experience, and that one comment was that a participant asked her daughter who was sitting next to her, and the daughter said, yeah, I'll go back to school, provided it's fun, but right. I'm happy in the online environment at the moment.
Very interesting, very, very interesting. Right, okay, so we'll move on while you continue giving us your comments and feedback. John, did you want to say something?
Well, just that the comments aren't now coming in. I think a mixed bag, yes, so lack of interaction, concentration span, motivation, interactivity, lack of interactivity, motivation, insufficient time, interactivity, motivation. Yeah, so I think, you know, no consensus there of the 4, something that really stands out. So all of them.
Right, yeah, it seems that Asil could really identify the top the top challenges. So not one only challenge is the most prominent, but we can say that all of them. Right. So before we move on with the rest of the webinar, we think it's really important for us to think about the terms we're using when we teach young learners. Are we really using the correct terms for the children we're teaching? So just to be clear on the term young learners, I got this chart from the Teaching English website, which you can see from it. It has the age ranges or age groups and the correct terms according to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, issued in 1989. So you've got the preschoolers, and this is from 2 to 5 years, and we call them early years. You've got the primary school pupils, and this is from 6 to 10 years, and we call them primary. Secondary pupils from 11 to 14, we call them lower secondary, and from 15 to 17, upper secondary, and from 18 to 25, these are not young learners, these are not children, these are adults, young adults perhaps. And this is based on the definition given by the United Nations, highlighting that a child is anyone who has not reached their 18th birthday. You can find a copy of this poster and another interesting copy on the Teaching English website, and I'll be sharing the link to the website at the end of the webinar. So, do adults and the kids learn differently? And to tackle this area, we're going to actually go back to Knowles' 5 assumptions, or Knowles' theory of adult learning, where he covered the how adults learn over 5 pillars. And we're going to compare how adults learn versus how children learn through Knowles' lens or through Knowles' 5 assumptions. So first of all, do you know anything about the adult learning theory and the Knowles' 5 assumptions? He built the theory of how adults learn around 5 pillars: self-concept, experience, readiness, orientation to learning, and motivation. So do you know anything about that? And do you know if children and adults learn differently? Do you know the key differences in general? Any comments coming through, John?
Not immediately. Not immediately.
Right. Okay. So while you're thinking about the key differences between adults and kids, Knowles, in his adult learning theory, talked about self-concept, how adults see themselves as learners, their experience, their learning experience, and what do they bring to the learning process, their readiness to learning, their orientation to learning, and their motivation. And we're going to actually use the same 5 assumptions, but not to talk about adult learning today, but rather to compare how kids learn differently from adults. So, child versus adult learning. The first pillar is, or the first point to discuss, is the self-concept. Adults actually are independent by nature, and they tend to evaluate themselves or the things in their surroundings. However, unlike the adults, children are still dependent. They depend on the rules and the instructions given by their teachers, so they still need their teacher's guidance. So, that said, the one who gives instructions to the children has the full command of their learning. So when we talk about self-concept, adults see themselves as independent, see themselves as able to differentiate between what's good and what's bad, but children do not see themselves the same way. They are dependent, and they still need rules and guidance from their teachers. The second pillar is the experience. And actually, kids, when they learn, they bring little experience to the learning. When they're faced with a learning activity, they have very little experience to bring to this learning activity. And this makes them really listen more to the teachers and become more influenced by their teachers. And through this, the kids are likely to have, or they would like to have role models. These role models could be their parents, their siblings, or, cartoon characters like Spider-Man, for example. So they'd like to have role models because they want to listen more. They want to copy somebody. They want to imitate because they have little experience to bring it to the learning activity. Unlike that, adults have a wealth of resources, and when they come to the learning activity you set up for them, they come with their own learning skills. They have developed already some learning strategies that they can bring to the learning experience you're exposing them to. And this actually establishes a good part of their identity. The next point is readiness. when you teach children, they wait for you to determine for them the next level of challenge. They cannot decide for them if they're ready for the next level of challenge. They follow the levels of an instruction in order to progress to a higher level of learning. And in this, they rely on their teacher who decides for them. On the other hand, adults are guided by their own need to learn. So they are in the position to determine and assess any gaps that they have in their learning, any gaps or anything that their lives is lacking. Then they look for ways to develop their inner selves. They look for ways to cover the gaps in their learning. But kids, no, kids wait for you to take their hands and move them from one level to the other. Orientation to learning. So how these both age groups see learning. Do they see learning differently? Yes. Adults see learning as a means to solve an existing problem. So when they learn something, they automatically link the existing learning experience they're having with a problem they actually have in their life, and they try to find a link to solve that problem. That's why the books that talk about managing life and solving life problems are really popular, and they sell a lot. But for kids, it's different. They just learn by subject matter, and they have no sense of immediacy. And by immediacy, we mean they are not really worried if the subject matter they're learning has got an immediate application into reality. They don't care. They're not conscious really if the lessons they face bear any deeper meaning or any practical function in their lives. Finally, the last pillar is motivation, and that's very common as Asil highlighted in her talk. Adults or grown-ups are driven mostly by emotions and aspirations. They want to be better versions of themselves. So from what I'm saying now, they can see that adults are internally motivated. They have intrinsic motivational factors. They want to move from self-esteem to self-actualization. And Laura will be talking to you in a few minutes about Maslow's pyramid and how self-esteem and self-actualization are basic, well, are human needs that need to be fulfilled, as important as the linguistic and educational needs. For children, it's different. It's often the external factors. They are motivated by external factors like competition. They'd like to learn if they compete against each other. Peer pressure. They want to get an A because their peer got an A. Or the consequences of failure. They want to pass the test because if they don't, they will miss a trip on the weekend or something, or a trip to the zoo or something. So these are the 5 elements that really encapsulate the key differences between how kids and adults learn. Do we have any responses on that, John?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, yeah, a lot of comments coming in, I think, which resonate, I think, with what you're saying about adults are more motivated, they're more experienced. Interestingly, comment about more experienced in the sense that they bring in to the classroom those online skills and ability to manipulate devices, for example. There's a bit of an argument going on out there, though, about whether adults are more self-directed or it's actually kids that are more self-directed. And an interesting question from Diana, who says, as well as adults asking why a lot, which I think comes back to your discussion around different kinds of motivation. Also, what do you think? Do you think that adults are more afraid of making mistakes than children? Good question. Huh?
It's a very good question, and I'm actually glad that there's an argument going on in the Q&A box, because this is a theory, and the adult learning theory has been challenged really. And while preparing for the webinar and from my teaching experience, I could really argue back to some of the points that the theory is presenting. So it's true. Who is more self-directed, adults or children? We can argue a lot about that, and for the independence really, and who is more independent learner, are they the adults or the kids? You really can argue relying on your own teaching experience, but this is a theory, and some criticism has been given to this theory since the 80s really. But it highlights, like, you know, the common grounds, like the key differences between the vast majority of adult learners versus the vast majority of young learners, like a typical adult and a typical kid. On the risk-taking point, really, thank you, Diana, for this question. When, in my experience, when I was teaching young learners, when I start a song and I ask the kids to dance with me, they just leave their chairs and dance. And I really struggled stopping them and putting them back into their chairs. But in my adult classes, it was a real struggle to convince them to do a game or to leave their chairs and move around the class, because adults have what we call affective filters, affective from affections, from emotions, from feelings. Children are not really self-conscious. They are not really worried about how they feel. They feel what they feel, and they manifest their feelings in whatever way. They take risks. They have no fear. They want to try out things. They do not magnify the meaning of failure or something. Unlike the adults fear failure. The adults fear the peer pressure. The adults don't want to take risk. The adults want to think a lot before they make any decision and take any risk. So you can see that with the young learners, you can experiment and try out ideas, even crazy and silly ideas. With the adults, you can face some resistance. And actually this asset or this advantage that the young learners have is a real asset for your teacher, and something that can really spice up your lessons, whether face-to-face or remotely.
And I think that resonates again with quite a few comments that are coming in about you know, how true are these differences, and you know, the answer that's such a good one, but also perplexing, is it depends. And I think that's a really important point, isn't it? And as we've said from the beginning of these series, that you know, that principle about teaching what's in front of you, teaching young learners, teaching adults, whoever you're teaching, that it does depend, and it depends on them, you know. And while there are trends and tendencies and differences that we can maybe generalize about, that's an important thing, isn't it? And I think another comment around age, which comes back to your slide around how we talk about young learners, is also key, isn't it? Because the difference between a teenager, for example, the difference between a very young child,
yep,
enormous.
Yeah, that causes a lot of variations when we apply the theory, really. Yes, thanks. These are very interesting points. Thank you. So now, having discussed the main differences between adults and children when they learn, what are the implications of this on our teaching methods? In terms of autonomy, when you teach kids, make sure you give clear instructions. Make sure you monitor closely and deal effectively with any issues. You need to lead your young learners step by step in whatever you're doing. However, I can easily contradict myself here, and I say when I used to design my young learners' lessons, I made sure I plant the seeds of independence and autonomy as possible as I could. So although young learners are not autonomous enough, they are not very much autonomous, they are not very much independent, but I'd like also in my lessons to start planting these seeds of autonomy so they develop independence and autonomy along the way they learn. Learning. So when you design your lessons remotely or face-to-face, make sure you give them a wide variety of activities. Activities that talk to their different senses. They have 5 senses. Make sure you have activities that utilize their 5 senses, because young learners are sensory learners and they respond well to activities which incorporate the TPR, the total physical response, or other similar activities. And as Asil mentioned in her challenges slide, their attention span is short. So make sure when you design and you deliver a classroom activity, it's not too long. It doesn't take too much time. And of course, young learners could really do with physical activities and games. They enjoy them, they like them. And if you're teaching them online, make sure, teaching them online doesn't mean we stop physical activities and games. No, that's not true. You still, while teaching them online, you still can present songs and pictures and the props to inject energy into your lessons and to keep them engaged. And by props, I mean use whiteboards, whether virtual whiteboards or the actual mini whiteboards. Use Realia, use puppets, use other things to level up their level of energy and engagement in the lessons. And remember, of course, to have a scorecard or a scoreboard or a reward chart. It's the same thing you have or you do in your face-to-face young learner class. And as we always keep saying, everything hasn't changed, but nothing has really changed. And back to the point of socialization, and education is not about 1 + 1 = 2. I think using activities that are very relevant to real life and their personal life could have a real value in improving their social skills. Take the reward chart as an example. So using a reward chart for rewards and punishment could really help you maintain the discipline in your online classroom, but also to promote social interaction and social presence between you and the learners and amongst the learners themselves. Anxiety, this is back to one of the comments we received through the Q&A box. Young learners have no fear and they are willing to try anything else. And also, this comes back to one of the comments we received, as long as it's fun. So they will play with you, they will take risks, they will do whatever you want them to do as long as it's fun and it's engaging. That's why one of the comments here was about learners are enjoying online learning because it's fun. So it seems like this is the only condition they can have in any learning activity. And also remember that young learners will mirror the energy of the teacher. So if you step in the online class with low level of energy, or any feeling of boredom, they will actually reflect this back to you. So make sure you're upbeat and enthusiastic as possible. The motivation, we said that the young learners generally, more or less, are not internally motivated. They always need external motivational factors. So make sure that what you present to them is of interest. And it's not only the language needs that you need to cover and tailor your lessons to, it's the language needs as well as their interests. So suppose they want to learn the present simple because they want to talk, because you think there is a language need here or a language gap where they need to use present simple to talk about their daily routines. That's fine, but make sure you present that in a context that really appeals to them and creates interest for them. And this applies, of course, to the homework. So many teachers complain that learners do not complete their homework. Maybe one thing to think about is, was my homework interesting enough for them? Did it appeal to them? Discipline. So we talked about using the reward charts and the scoreboards, and just to manage the reward and punishment in the online class. And perhaps in the online classes, if a student acts really out in an online lesson, it could be useful to talk privately to the parents about the situation. But the key thing is to deal with the discipline issue calmly and effectively. The life experiences, again, young learners do not bring life experience, well, generally speaking, to the learning activities, but they bring enthusiasm, curiosity, and energy. And unlike adults explore life, take on lessons, learn things, but children are still, making sense of the world around them. So bear in mind that young learners are not emotionally mature as the adult learners. Now we come to the part where my colleague Laura will give you some practical techniques for teaching young learners online. Over to you, Laura.
Hi, Hala. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here with you all. So I wanted to look at just sort of a few different topics within this idea of practical techniques. And so those are going to be something I've called Maslow before Bloom. If you want to click the slide on for me, Hala. And then after that, I'll talk about, just keep clicking, it's fine, sort of some of the discipline issues you might face in the classroom, the most common one perhaps being cameras. I want to talk about techniques to really involve everybody in the class. And then after that, the next one up is thinking about some of the benefits you can get of online learning when the learners are actually in their own environment, and also they're online. What can that do for us? So Maslow before Bloom. So I'm guessing everyone here is familiar with the Bloom's pyramid, with the lower order skills, the higher order skills, and this is great. This is how we teach. But you can't do any of that until you've looked at Bloom. And Hala, if you could show us Bloom. So that's the next one. Again. And so Bloom's pyramid is all about what we need as humans. And this is young learners and adults. We get it from different places, but we all need the same thing. We cannot learn until our basic needs are met. So Bloom categorizes those as physiological needs. So that's if we're hungry, we can't learn. If we're thirsty, we can't learn. If there's no oxygen, and if we're tired and that we can't learn. If we don't feel safe and comfortable, we can't learn. So these are all barriers that have to be met before any learning can take place. There's no point designing the perfect lesson if your learners aren't able to listen and take it in. So, and I think especially at the minute, especially in the situation that the world is in, And especially in remote learning, we have to be even more aware of these things because it's harder to observe our learners. It's harder for us to know what's going on with them, to know how they feel, because we can't monitor them in the same way as we can in a classroom. So Nora, could you pop the link to the poll in the Q&A or the chat box perhaps so people can click on it? With this in mind, I'd like to ask you to do a little poll for me just to tell me how you are feeling right now. So hopefully Nora or Hala will pop that link in the Q&A or the chat so that you can go to the poll and tell me how you're feeling. Ah, there we go. Thank you. Nora's popped it in there. So this is a little poll. I just picked a few different adjectives, and because we're thinking about teaching young learners, I put some pictures next to them for our learners who need that extra English support. And you can see, if you vote, how people are feeling right now. So I can see that, oh, we've got somebody who's feeling a bit bored. We'll have to get this webinar a bit more energetic for them. Somebody else who's hungry, so perhaps struggling to learn. If people are feeling like this, they're not learning. So we have to think about how we can address that in the classroom, especially the online classroom. Can I have my next slide, Hala? And one way we can do this is by making sure we're doing wellbeing check-ins. So you can do a wellbeing check-in like I just did with a poll. Some online classrooms have polls built in Zoom, but there are lots and lots of online tools you can use for this instead. And certainly with very young learners, having those emojis is a great way of doing it. With older teenagers, I stole this idea from one of my colleagues because I love it. I think a great way of doing a check-in is using this on a scale of Loki, or on a scale of, next slide, cat, on a scale of, next one again, on a scale of sheep. So these are memes that you'll find all over the internet, and the idea is you ask people, how do you feel today? And they respond to a picture, and then they can tell you the number in the chat box. So on a scale of sheep, how are you guys feeling today? Is anybody bouncing around in joy? And number 9? Or are some of you maybe number 4 and you just want to hide your head in a bucket and have enough and please let it be the holiday soon? There are millions of these memes, and I think they're great for teenagers because teenagers will have come across them on the internet before. They're humorous, they're light-hearted, but it just lets you know how your class are feeling, and you can make a note if someone's not feeling great today. You can then go on to be sensitive to that in the lesson. Or if someone sort of, indicates that really they're not feeling great, you can schedule time in your lesson to have a private chat with them in the breakout room, perhaps. But being sensitive to your learners, you have to find creative ways when you can't monitor them as effectively as you could in the face-to-face classroom. Could you advance the slide, Hala? So screen time limits. Earlier, Asil was talking about concentration span. And in my experience, I can get my learners to concentrate for longer face-to-face than I can online. And it's really important to remember that. And it's really important to think about things as well from a health and safety point of view for you as well as for your learners. So practical advice, planning away from screen activities or breaks at more regular intervals in the lesson. It's tiring for your eyes, and it's tiring for your brain to spend too much continuous time online. And the younger your learners, the less continuous time online they can be spending. Hala earlier mentioned TPR, and we've got to carry that across into our classrooms as well, because physical movement, stretching, that's all connected to the screen times. It's part of children's physical well-being and comfort. So movement-based activities, I'll suggest a few in a minute. And then other things to consider in relation to this, next slide, or move the slide on, please. Reasonable expectations. Without a single exception, every teacher I've spoken to has told me that they get through less in an online lesson than they would in a face-to-face lesson. you have to adjust what you expect, because otherwise you're going to put undue pressure on your learners. If they feel you're rushing to get to something, they will not relax, they will not feel comfortable, and they won't learn. All of this is about making the learning environment absolutely comfortable for your learners. So if we move on to talk about sort of classroom management and discipline, the biggest issue I've had is getting my learners to turn their cameras on so I can see them. But as with anything to do with classroom management and discipline, you have to know your own non-negotiables, the things you will not compromise on, the behaviour standards that you absolutely have to have. And maybe that's also related to school policies if you have whole school discipline policies. But whatever your policies and your decisions are, just as in the face-to-face classroom, consistency and fairness is key. One thing young learners are super sensitive to is fairness. That it's something that's absolutely ingrained in young learners. As soon as they perceive unfairness, young learners will start to resent you. Now, we talked earlier, we said every child's different. So if a child won't turn their camera on or won't comply for another reason, you need to find out why. Could you maybe type in the chat box for me what you think some children might have as reasons for not turning their camera on? Think about maybe different reasons for younger and older learners. Any ideas? I'm going to have a look in the Q&A, see what you say. Why maybe they might or might not want to turn cameras on. I'm using cameras on as an example here, but I actually think it's very relevant for online learning. I know as a teacher how hard it is to teach to a sea of blank black squares, and I'm sure you all had a bad hair day. John, yes, you're right. And I often feel that. I've recently gone pink with my hair, which my learners love. They think it's very funky. But that sensitivity to how you look, super, super challenging, especially for teenagers who are so aware, I think, especially nowadays, of physical appearances. Any other ideas coming up in the Q&A? Can you see anything else, John? I mean, something.
A generic thing about shyness.
Yeah, it is hard, you know. Young learners also may be reluctant to share their physical environment. You know, if they're studying and attending class from their bedroom, that's a private space they might not want to share with anyone. Or they might be embarrassed about their space, or they may have, you know, family moving around behind them that they don't want you to see. You know, there's lots and lots of reasons that people are reluctant to turn cameras on. Now, you can make the technology work for you. A lot of online environments have the ability to turn off something called self-view. You can do this definitely in Zoom, unfortunately not in Teams, where young learners can keep their camera on, but flick it so that they can't see themselves. And this can really help in overcoming that feeling of shyness. Seeing ourselves reflected back when we talk is really not natural. I found this when I started teaching online. I was like, you don't spend, you know, when you're teaching face to face, you're not looking in a mirror all the time. And it's quite alien to do that in the online classroom. So if there is a technological solution, use it, but also don't be afraid to share with your learners why you want them to turn their camera on or their microphone on. You know, Hala was saying earlier about planting the seeds of autonomy, and she was spot on, because young learners do not become independent and autonomous adults by magic. It's our job as teachers to help them along the path of becoming autonomous and independent. And, you know, it's a continuum. What one expects from a 3-year-old is different from a 6-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 15-year-old. And so we can be explicit. We can bring them into the secret and explain to them why we turn things, why we want them to turn cameras on. And I think that's really fair to do. Hala, next little thing, please. So yes, designing fun activities that actually require the camera, and I'll show you a couple in a minute. But you also have to think, what if no matter what we can't get a camera working? What workarounds and other strategies have I got up my sleeve? So we'll look at some of those as well. So the next sort of question or topic I proposed was making sure that everyone is paying attention. And again, for me, this is related to that key difference in an online classroom versus face-to-face. I bet you all have something I call teacher radar. You know, once you've been teaching a few years, you develop this. You can be talking to one child, but there's somebody behind you starts whispering, and you know which child it is. You start to sense which child is struggling and hasn't started writing. You know, you can see the whole room more easily, and that's harder online. Have any of you found that? Let us know in the Q&A if any of you have experienced this. Any kind of struggles with monitoring and knowing what everyone's doing, especially if the camera's off. So I think there are lots and lots of strategies that we should be using to get children involved and to make sure where perhaps in the face-to-face classroom we'd nominate and say, all right, Ahmed, can you tell me the answer to question 3? And Ahmed will tell you the answer, but you can see that everyone else is paying attention, and you can't in the online classroom. So you have to find ways to get every child to answer every question. So there's a few ideas on this slide. Someone was asking about movement-based activities. The most simple one is standing up and sitting down. So if you think the answer is true, stand up. If you think the answer is false, sit down. You can see quite easily visually who's stood up and sat down. Everybody has to do it, so every child has to be paying attention. You can ask children to say in a multiple choice, if they think answer 1 is correct, put 1 finger up. If you think answer 2 is correct, put 2 fingers up. If you think answer 3 is correct, put 3 fingers up. So again, you're using visual cues. Or you can have them hold up their answer to the camera. Hala mentioned using mini whiteboards. You can do it just as effectively with a piece of paper. So they could try writing a huge A, or they could write a sentence. Lots and lots of ways, but the key is that you're asking every child to do it. Of course, you might want to do this with making sure they're paying attention. So in the face-to-face classroom, I bet you use lots of call and responses like 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. In the virtual classroom, I like to ask all my children to put their hands on their heads as soon as they're ready to move on. So it's very, very easy to monitor visually, solving that problem. But if there's no camera, you are forced to rely on other methods. So maybe if you're teaching in Teams, you've got the chat box. You can ask every child to write their answer in the chat box. Or if you're teaching on Zoom, you can make use of the reactions. So, you know, show me a thumbs up if you think the answer is true. Show me a heart if you think the answer is true. Lots and lots of different tools to exploit depending on the virtual environment you're in. But the key message for me with this one is to really make sure that all the children are involved. Now, we've talked a lot about the challenges, but I think there are also lots of benefits to online learning when children are in their own home. And I'm just going to give you 3 examples that are actually all movement based. And the first example is something called show and tell. So when children are in their own environment, they have things to hand. And an activity that is really, really great for practicing speaking skills is show and tell. The best example of this is where someone brought their rabbit to class to tell us about it. So it's really, this activity is a really, really great simple one. You know, learners, you plan it out over a few lessons and you say, you know, Maria, in next lesson, I'd like you to have a 2-minute show and tell. Kareem, in the lesson after, you will have a 2-minute show and tell. And you ask learners to bring along an object that's important to them and tell the class about it. Very simple, but very personal. And it's not something that's as easy to do in the classroom, face-to-face, because I certainly don't think we'd want our children bringing their pet rabbits to the face-to-face classroom. Well, we might want it, but it's not very practical. Another example of an activity I've recently done with teenage learners is a fashion show. So learners were working in groups and they had to design and plan a fashion show. And because they were at home, they could actually dress up in the outfits and come into the camera while their teammates described what they were wearing, and then they could dash off and change their outfit using what they had in the wardrobe. So very tangible, using real clothes. You could not do that in a face-to-face classroom without a lot more planning and preparation, but in the online environment, really interactive, really fun, lots of energy, but produces lots of interesting vocabulary for things they want to talk about. You know, teenagers, they want to talk about their clothes. They've got the latest Adidas sweatshirt, they've got, I don't know, you know, they've got the brands, they've got their cool clothes, or they've styled them in a certain way, very much tied in with that developing identity, but gets them up and moving. You know, they're dashing, they're getting changed. So, and then the other activity that I've done online that's a really fun one is a scavenger hunt. I don't know if any of you have done scavenger hunts before, but again, this is inspired by the fact they're in their home environment. So you could make a list of different items, and children have to race to find that item in their home and be the first one to bring it back to the camera. And this can work at lots of different levels. It's great for vocab development. You could start simple with you know, your primary learners and write, okay, who can find me something yellow? Who can find me something blue? Who can find me an animal? Who can find me something soft? So it depends what, you know, you can do with colours, you can do it with shapes. Who can find me something square? Who can find me something that's a circle? Learners have to quickly find it, bring it back. So they're moving around, they're stretching, they're getting the fidgets out. All of these activities are really fabulous. Lots and lots of movement involved with them, but keeping things very concrete and real, which we know is beneficial for young learners. And then the final point I wanted to make, because I am sensitive to time, is that when the learners are already on the internet, there are so many tools that are just a click away. On this slide, there's lots and lots of activities, lots and lots of websites that I use. I'm sure you're familiar with some of them. But what I'd like to do, Nora, could you pop the other link, the Google document link, into the chat for me, or into the question and answer box? I've prepared a Google document for you to have a quick look at, and I've put links to all of these websites and apps and tools in there. But what I'd really love you guys to do is to put in there a link to another website or another tool that you've used yourself. So when you click on the Google document link, you'll see that there's a true or false question, and I'd like you to put a tick or a number 1 in either the true column or the false column, and we'll see whether or not, just to see what everyone's opinions are. This is another great way to get learners to all participate and all tell you the answer. And then if you scroll down, you'll see a list of useful websites and apps that I've started. If you all put a link in there to something you love, and then you make the document a favorite, or you save the link, what we'll have is a list of lots and lots of great websites that we all recommend that we put together, because I think fundamentally we all learn from each other and we've all got lots to share. So while you're doing that, if Hala could show me my final slide, I want to leave with one last message, and I'm going to leave you with a kiss. And kiss means keep it simple. Online learning can be overwhelming. It's overwhelming for me when I started. It's overwhelming for the learners themselves. It's okay to start simple. Do not feel that you have to use every cool activity and every cool website in your first lesson. Start with one. Get yourself used to it. Feel confident. Get the children confident with it. And then you can add in more gradually. Nobody expects us to be experts in remote learning overnight. Not simple, because I think you'll all surprise yourselves with how quickly you can learn and develop your skills. Hala, back over to you. I can't wait to see what websites people are recommending.
Thank you very much, Laura. for this fantastic section of yours on practical activities for the online classes. And that's very true. Keep it simple and short, really. And that really links to one of the considerations I'm going to finish today's webinar with. And before we move on to the final part of the webinar, John, do you have any responses? Do you want to jump in?
No, but there's been so much food for thought, a lot of comments coming through, and I think if we just bring those together right at the end after you've just said what you're about to say, I think that would work well.
Right. Okay. So I'll just finish with a few considerations for you guys while teaching children remotely. One, keep the parents in the loop. Establish partnership with the parents, because the parents exist where the students are learning these days, so they can support you and they can be a facilitating tool to the learning process. Set a routine and stick to it. Again, as you normally do in your face-to-face classroom, you need to establish a routine, and you need to keep going back to it as you teach them. Display books directly on the screen. I think Laura touched upon that one, using mini whiteboards or a blank sheet within a plastic wallet, or even stick the book directly to the screen and point with your finger to the pictures or the different sections of the book, because some teachers tend to open the book and read from them to the camera. So adjusting the book and making it face the camera would be helpful. Also, grab their attention by using the waltz, and by waltz we mean what are we learning today. So you can start with a menu, a learning menu every lesson by the waltz. What are we learning today, or we are learning to? Then you can have a list of objectives of today's lesson. We are learning to listen. We are learning to read. We are learning to do whatever. You can present the lesson objectives through the waltz. We are learning to's, or you can elicit from them, get them to tell you what they are learning in this lesson. And you can visit or revisit this list of objectives at the end of the lesson and tick off or check what you've covered throughout the lesson. This gives the children sense of progress. They feel they achieved something. They started from square one and they moved up to square 10, for example. It gives them sense of achievement as well. And as Laura and myself mentioned earlier, try to incorporate fun, but also personalized practice. Get them to use stuff from their surroundings. One of Laura's activities was about who can get me something yellow, who can get me something blue. So they can use things they have in their environment. It's personalized but also fun at the same time. Speak slowly. Again, this goes back to Laura's technique of the KISS. Keep it simple and short. Do not overwhelm yourself and the children with too much information, too many technological tools. Speak slowly, break it down, make it simple and short, and take one thing at a time. Manage the online behavior, again, by setting up rules, establishing a routine, and sticking to it. And I have a sample of a ground rules picture you can use with your children online. Zoom ground rules, for example, some people call it the netiquette or the etiquette or the internet etiquette or the classroom contract. Call it whatever you like, and it sets the rules for how you and the learners and how the learners themselves deal with each other online. And last but not least, the online safety. Make sure that your background doesn't have anything distracting or anything threatening or breaching the children's safety. Make sure that the child is online with you while an adult is attending. And again, coach the children and parents on not to share credentials and passwords with strangers. Check the links and the videos before you take them to the online class. Make sure that the content is safe for the children. So these are the things we have today. We covered key differences between young learners and adults when it comes to learning, implications of the differences on teaching, practical techniques for the online classroom, and the key considerations while teaching young learners remotely. So that's all from me. Before I hand over back to John, these are some useful resources for you guys. Check out Edutopia on teaching preschool and young learners online. Cambridge ELT blog has got some good tips on teaching young learners online. Check out the Teaching English website for loads and loads of stuff on teaching young learners online and face-to-face. And I do recommend the Carol Reed. She's like a young learner guru like Laura, and she's got a fantastic blog that I do recommend you guys to check out. And finally, there is the British Council famous Teaching Young Learners online MOOC. It's an online course. It's very famous and popular, and it has so far more than 44,000 users, teachers enrolled. So that's all from me. Back to you, John.
Thank you so much indeed. I'm going to be very brief then. A couple of things that have come up that we didn't really touch on. One I think is very interesting about specifically for young learners. It's about preparation for later life in a way that's not true for adults. I think lots of discussion around teacher-centeredness and learner-centeredness. Discussion around giving outcomes, but letting young learners find their own way to meet those outcomes. So quite a lot of discussion, I think, around what kinds of approaches work best with young learners. And I think one final point, really, and it relates to what Laura was saying in her last slides about the show and tell and the fashion show, the scavenger hunt. This is so important. It's such an important message. It's one that we've been coming back to throughout this series, that there are benefits and opportunities of online learning, as well as the challenges. And I think that, you know, that we have a responsibility, but also an interest to, you know, to become more confident and to embrace those opportunities and make the best use of the different kinds of opportunities that the online environment brings us. So thank you so much indeed. Laura, fantastic. Asil, thank you so much. Hala, thank you very much. Nora, fantastic, thank you. And especially thanks to everybody who joined us this afternoon. And if this is the last day of the week, please have a great weekend. Don't forget, we have webinar sessions, the Ask Hala. It's the last Thursday of the month, 4 p.m. Egypt time. Before the next one, please take the opportunity to visit our website and to register. And we look forward to seeing you again in August. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening and a great weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.